Now, we trust that you are comfortable.
Indeed, Kris.
And we thank you for your consideration.
Yours as well, Kris.
Does anyone have any inquiry or question of some kind? Or perhaps something you want to simply discuss?
My mind is quickened when you begin the conversation, Kris.
That is a very nice way to get out of the situation.
Perhaps.
But here, you do bring up a very interesting idea about the mind. Of course, everyone has a mind. Not necessarily everyone uses it in a beneficial manner, but everyone utilizes it nonetheless. And it is a most potent device, a literal technology, if you like, but a biospiritual technology. And unfortunately, it is not the kind of technology that can be invented and put into robots or any kind of artificial intelligence. They may be able to mimic some reasoning factors, but cannot necessarily equate the functions of the mind in any significant manner. But for those with an biological organism, such as yourselves, learning to properly utilize and harness the mind will have a significant impact in the quality of your life and the fulfillment and enjoyment of that life. At its core, the individual utilizes the mind as the infant, the young child, in a manner that seeks to inquire about every aspect of the environment. And it is open to all manner of inquiry. It is open to all manner of investigation. It is not hampered yet by various kinds of beliefs and or restrictions until it is encouraged to rein in its inquisitiveness and encouraged to conform to the status quo. Thus begins the long process of suppression, if you like, suppressing one's powerful emotions and feelings, suppressing one's curiosity, inquisitiveness, and natural intelligence. And as that individual grows and matures, they may come to the conclusion that the assumptions that they have accepted about reality, about the nature of the reality they live in, is open to questioning once again. Then they may have to review and question and change the nature of that very reality that they have been encouraged to accept. When there is an suppression of that natural curiosity, of the feelings and the emotions, there is also an isolation of certain aspects of the intelligence, of the mind, that may take quite some time to recuperate and return to its original state. And some of that work can sometimes be quite exhausting, because you have to literally question the very nature, not only of the world, of the reality, but the nature of the self, nature of your own self as the source of the reality that has been created. Well, some individuals may think of this as adding to an individual's woes and concerns, but the reality is quite the contrary, as it is a powerful reminder of the exact nature and extent of that powerful mind. So the mind does what it is told. Whether you believe you will succeed or not will always come true. It is up to you, the individual, to take into consideration the very contents of that mind, meaning exploring the ideas that you have accepted, and in this way, literally put away that which is no longer functioning for you, and activate, if you like, or focus more on those ideas / beliefs that have proven and are beneficial for you and will continue to also be beneficial to your nature. So it is always to your advantage to be generous with the kinds of thoughts that are uplifting, that are nurturing, and that give you an expanded sense of joy and well-being and grace than its opposites. Does this make sense to you?
Yes,
It
yes,
sure
it
does to me.
Yes.
Many individuals, of course, may have to examine this kind of information. Basically, because it can initially appear to cause conflict. Because no one has ever taught in any system how to question the very nature of the reality you are in, nor the very nature of your being. And to begin such a process literally upsets the apple cart. It rocks the boat and may be a cause of consternation. But we can assure you that if you do venture into this very idea of questioning the reality you are in and the nature of the self, then you will discover, to your great surprise, that not everything is as you were told. And that people's assumptions are sometimes taken as a fact. And yet, a simple line of inquiries can begin to unravel these mysteries. And there have been many, many attempts throughout all ages to do just that. There are all sorts of secret societies and spiritual societies and spiritual groups, and even some religions themselves started off as a line of inquiry challenging the very concept of reality, and eventually get lost as they undertake such a journey. And many, once lost, may have difficulty in finding their way again. And it is always to your advantage to continue questioning the very nature of existence. Not that you might one day find all the answers, because nature and reality always change, even though to the eyes and other senses it appears to be always the same. But what changes is the individual. And it is the individual that creates that reality. And when the individual withholds his or her changing nature, there are often difficulties and challenges, because the self is not a static thing. It is not something that comes out of the assembly line, all done up. It too changes. It is always in a state of action. It cannot be static by its very nature and its very properties. when the worldview the individual holds on to is rigidly held onto and not allowed to make any needed changes, then difficulties begin to show up. When growth is not permitted, then some systems begin to fall apart. There are in your societies certain sciences geared towards the study of the aging population, the aging individual, and some of the changes that occur physically. There are also some studies that are geared towards the study of some psychological and other changes as the individuals themselves mature. But there are no studies that explore the need to allow the individual to explore and access his or her own greater nature in terms of his or her or their psychology. In the broader sense, in the sense that one can tap into a vast reserve of assistance, of help, of resources, and skills that are relevant to the individual as they begin to explore their deeper nature. And as you all, yourselves and many others, explore these kinds of teachings, whether it is from Uncle Seth or Elias or Bashar or others, you begin to get a little glimpse into the greater nature of the reality of the individual. And it is that study or exploration that will benefit the world, that will benefit the whole of society. But that takes time in your terms. Are there perhaps any inquiries so far, or other subject matters?
Hi, Kris.
Indeed.
Yeah, if you have any more advice on helping elderly parents, or just advice on some of the issues that the elderly deal with as they're getting older, I'd be interested in hearing that.
One issue that does crop up is the sense of self-worth. And by that we mean that your system, your society, is geared to value the individual only in so far as what they can produce for the society or the community, whilst they still have a physically able body, that they can do the 9 to 5, that they can produce at the assembly line, that they can pay the taxes. But after that, they are often relegated to an out-of-the-way place. Whether it is in a retirement home or somewhere else. And they themselves may have to question the values and the worth that they assumed was their life goal, life mission. And many such individuals go into physical and mental decline once there is a realization that they are not as valued in their society as they once were. And this is far more prevalent in the Western world than it is in the Eastern world, where the older members of the family, the grandparents and the great-grandparents, are still considered useful members of the family, the community, and the society for their wisdom and for the help they can still provide in helping or assisting to raise the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren, for their advice when it is needed. And there is still a great deal of regard and respect for them in those terms, which is quite different from the Western world approach to those who are older or elderly. As if somehow or other, once you have peaked in that way, then you must somehow or other simply be put away. And though many would not confront anyone, there is indeed a great deal of pain and rejection from such actions. Feeling isolated, and even at times a burden to the family they once themselves gave birth to and raised and loved. So the entire system and approach to the system could use a great deal of revision and correction and editing for an enhanced appreciation of those who are in their elder years. Even many of your Aboriginal native nations still treat their elders as a great source of wisdom and teaching. Simply because they have already gone through so many challenges. So some advice could be simply that as early as possible in life, begin to inquire as to where you put your values, how you can make yourself recognize that you are an eternal individual. And even though with the passage of time, as you understand it, the body shows different manifestations of that time, the mind and the intellect need not diminish. And the individual need not be considered a burden, but instead a valuable resource. That may bring about a great change to the individual And when there is enough change in the individual, then there are changes that are often made at the community and social and cultural levels. But if you understand your self-worth as being more than the sum of what you can offer the corporation or the company or the business or the family, then you might indeed see that there is a brighter future than to be shunned and put away in a home. Does that make some sense to you?
Absolutely.
The earlier that you can start putting such things into practice, the better it is for yourself. Keep your mind active and productive, and understand that you are the cause and the source of your own happiness, your own joy. And that happiness and that joy are not dependent upon being loved by others, but instead simply loving others first. And that includes loving yourself as well. The entire belief system that is associated with consumerism and commerce are geared principally to have you produce and then get out of the way for the next generation, and then get out of the way for the following generation. Such a system, however, can only be sustained for a certain period of time before it begins to show cracks in the system and eventually prove to be untenable. It cannot be sustained indefinitely. And there is another system in the wings, if you like. That is why all these changes are occurring, all these protests around the world, all these challenges to the status quo and the authority figures. Because there is already an innate understanding that the system cannot continue this way forever. It must change. There must be a new system, not a system that acts as a band-aid to cover up the old and keep it going, but instead a brand new system. It will take some time. It will take some work, but it will occur, as any great changes in society have over the last many thousands of years. We trust this is of assistance.
Yes, absolutely. My connection cut out for several minutes there, so I'm going to have to listen to the recording.
Indeed.
But I appreciate what I've heard so far.
Are there perhaps any other kinds of inquiries?
Kris, to build on Reed's question and what you're saying, how do we, with these changes and as you say, the cracks in the system are showing up, how do we as individuals maintain our own equilibrium and weather these storms or these changes?
Yeah. Every so often, in terms of time, your societies and your race decide on new projects, if you like, a new exploration. You may not understand all the consequences as you venture forth in these new undertakings. And you make adaptations as you go along until you recognize that there comes a point when one system is no longer feasible. It cannot continue. So you try another. And your race has done so many times over. The important thing to keep in mind is that as long as your individual nature is understood, as long as you understand that joy and fulfillment come from you and not from the society, from the culture, from the race, from the nation, from the family. As long as you understand that you are literally the creator of your experience, whatever experimentation is in the process of evolving, you will remain a steadfast individual. You may even shine like a beacon from the lighthouse to those who may no longer recognize what is occurring in the society or the culture, and may seek to come to you, perhaps unknowingly, for inquiries, for information, for knowledge. There have always been groups of individuals in various cultures that have been considered the wise ones. That is why your native cultures and many others have always respected the wisdom and the accumulated wisdom of the elders, because it gives them a ready base of knowledge with which to understand how to proceed. But when that is being removed, it is more difficult to establish a particular sense of direction. And elders in older cultures have always been the beacons in that way. They help provide a particular kind of foundation upon which to build your cultures and society, instead of inhibit the growth of that culture and society. So always keep yourself front and center. Always understand that your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your imaginings, and all of the ideas that you accept are first and foremost not you, but that you are the one who experiences those realities, which are then projected outwardly for you to understand in an objectified manner. And in this way, you will always have a bank of knowledge and wisdom at your fingertips. When the elders are themselves not cultivated and shunned, the society and the culture, even the nations, are in a position of angst, even at times of an existential crisis. That is when internal wisdom makes its voice heard through individuals who allow the opening of that inner wisdom, such as Rupert and Uncle Seth and others, who may come and speak and sow the seeds of wisdom and knowledge, literally creating another generation of wise elders. All these teachings have nothing to do with creating the perfect job and the big bank account and even the parking space. But it has to do with awakening that ancient dormant wisdom that is within each individual that encounters the information. Does that make some sense to you?
Makes sense to me. That's fascinating. One question, Kris, as you're talking, can I ask a follow-up?
Indeed.
So when you're talking about the elders, when I look at the elders from my particular tradition, they tend to be conservative and trying to hold on, I think, to the system that's showing the cracks. And on a personal level, I just haven't felt impelled to interact without that kind of ideas and find myself drifting away from that, if that makes sense. So I haven't found that as nourishing for me.
When we make reference to elders, it should be understood that it is those who carry the torch of wisdom.
Ah, I see.
And even some of those who do not necessarily align with your views may still have the odd kernel or even spark of wisdom, even though themselves they might reject it, holding on to, as you have said, their old ideas, and especially old conservative ideas. Conservatism in that sense is not necessarily wisdom geared. Do you follow?
Yes. Yeah. Makes sense.
Are there perhaps other inquiries?
Kris, a few moments ago, you made reference to Seth, and I remember reading in the Seth books 25, 30 years ago. I came away with, many things, but what stood out in my mind was that I do create everything in my reality, but that the elderly is one of the populations besides the youth to who are the most creative in society. And that has carried me through the years, knowing that as I am maturing, I am also growing in wisdom and in creativity.
Indeed. In fact, if those particular factors in the elderly were cultivated to a greater degree than they are now, there might be less of a tendency for some of the elderly to manifest what you call early onset dementia or dementia altogether, because they would still be able to focus their energy and their creativity because there is a recognition that they are still valued as opposed to not valued. So why should they hang around? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Very much so.
And it would be
fascinating, Kris.
It would be an interesting project to explore in the creating of groups of elderly who can tap into many of their talents, even if those talents had not necessarily been manifested whilst they were on their journey to being elderly, something they always wanted to try. There are individuals who later in life discover that they are very good artists, they are writers, they are composers, sculptors, even though these are things they only wished they had tried when they were younger. But the talent was not necessarily tapped at those times. However, knowing the nature of the universal individual, other aspects or multidimensional self, if you like, other aspects of that individual may have developed those talents that they did not. And then they align with that particular probability and then can suddenly discover that they are a natural at writing, painting, cooking, sculpting, and so many other things.
Mm-hmm.
Because the talent did not die, they were simply shifted to another probable.
Yes, I understand and I experience that. Yes, thank you for that.
Indeed. Someone else, perhaps. It is an interesting evening in geriatrics.
Yes. That's a large portion of the population also.
Indeed.
The good portion.
I could just see, Kris, from what you said earlier about how even our country is kind of losing its way by not embracing the us that are getting older and our wisdom. As you can see, just in our political division, it's like it's a ship that's kind of adrift and could use a good dose of love and compassion from its elders.
Indeed, it could, very much. But it is for you to give that love and compassion, both to yourself and others, and help flip the situation.
Indeed.
The present system thrives on separating and dividing all peoples into different groups that then end up at each other's throats. Because no one has truly learned the value of being valued and of valuing others. Once such a simple thing can be recognized and established and put into practice, there can indeed be some tremendous changes in society. But the key point is stop talking and start doing. Put it into practice. If the farmer only talks about the beautiful seeds he will sow and the beautiful harvest he will reap, but never puts it into practice, can he truly be called a farmer?
Nope.
Indeed not. He will starve. What say you, Lisa?
I was wondering about these ideas and beliefs that we can focus on to change our experience. What are the limitations of that? Because I remember reading, Seth saying something like, if this person wants to be an opera singer, but it's not like maybe in their best interest, then they're not going to get to that point. Maybe they'll study music or do something, but they're not going to be the singer that they want to be. So I was just wondering, how do we know what our limitations are?
So, if you go about thinking that you should have a list of limitations as targets, you might actually miss your very best talents. So, for instance, you have heard many times, and all of you have heard and read about many times, of a young man wanting to be a great professional tackleback or linebacker or some great football player hero, only to suddenly have an accident of the kind that can prevent him from pursuing that career. And suddenly discovering that he may indeed be very good at singing. In fact, it comes very naturally. Has a great voice. And with some coaching, ends up being a tremendous singer with a great career. But if he had not had this particular injury, would never have discovered that he can be a great singer. Now, this may or may not prove the point, but we are simply saying that there are times when certain things, quote unquote, happen that lead you to explore other alternatives that you may or may not have considered, but suddenly it shows up into your life in such a way that completely changes your outlook and the very nature of the life that you lead, as opposed to the one you thought you would have. So you always have a few things that you might have an interest in. Explore those that seem to draw you the most, and see what kind of satisfaction, fulfillment of happiness it gives you. And in this way, study your nature, your psychology in either of the projects you are exploring, and see where you tend to naturally gravitate to. And you might be entirely surprised that it comes about very naturally for you. So, for instance, what have you always thought you might aspire to be, but did not dare venture into?
A dancer.
And what might be keeping you from doing that?
I just haven't thought about it in a long time. Just work.
And what would happen if you did take some dance lessons?
It'd probably be a lot of fun.
Now, it does not mean that if you take dance lessons, somehow or other you must end up on the stage with a worldwide following. Many people never go there, but for their satisfaction, and it might lead to discovering other talents that you had not explored before. When there is dancing, there is music, there is often singing. Sometimes these are unobserved as also being of an interest.
I understand.
What other things as a child would you have explored had you been given the opportunity?
Code breaking and code writing.
And if you ventured into the exploration of some of these, what would that feel like to you?
It's interesting because, you know, me just remembering that this is something that I was interested in, it kind of takes me back to that young child, and it's like I have like all of these images and memories now that are coming forward, and it feels like it's still a part of me, but not like not in the forefront, but it's just there.
So they have simply become the unexplored Lisas. And the Lisas that held some of those dreams, ideas, may have evolved in a different way, have acquired a different mind, a different perception or perspective on life than you did. But they are still part of you. They compose the clustered self that you are. You are always, and all of you, many selves at once. You simply choose to focus upon one particular slice of that self, thinking that this is all there is to you. But at least you get an idea of what we are speaking about.
Yes, absolutely.
Are there perhaps any other ideas, things you want to explore, any of you? And what about you? Indeed.
Kris, my follow-up question was, so if there's an interest that we decide not to pursue or focus on, is there an aspect of ourself that is focusing on that? Like, is there a part of me somewhere designing video games and some other reality?
Indeed. The self you are now is not the only kind of self that you are. Think of all the things as a young child that you had an interest in. And these are all offshoots of you that have developed, that have evolved in their own ways. All these probable yous that do not necessarily have a focus with your attention, but they have their attention. They have their own minds. And collectively, you have a group mind, if you like, in terms of dreams. All of you, all of these different Daniels, share information, share wisdom, share views and ideas, what works, what does not work. And if you suddenly decided to pursue an interest that you had given up on some time back, then some of the information and the experiences of that Daniel may begin to bleed through because of your interest, because of your desire. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. Game on.
And what about yourself, Alan? You are so quiet this evening.
Well, I think all of this has been valuable. I'm kind of at a loss for words beyond that.
Indeed. And indeed, we thank you all for your very valuable consideration. And do value yourselves as an independent yet powerful individual. And we return Joseph to you now.
Thank you, Kris.
Thank you, Kris.
Thank you very, very much, Kris.
Thanks, Kris.
So how did it go?
That was excellent. A very fulfilling session.
As usual, I am going to repeat. It was wonderful.
Yes.
I have a little inkling what he talked about. I just feel old.
Well, that was the theme.
I'm gonna stop the recording.
At that point right there.
Yep.
Well,